Hey, this is DROdio. So, welcome to the FounderCulture video on all things sales and marketing related. Specifically, this video is for founders, so seed or Series A founders that are in the founder selling stage, moving into the company building stage, so starting to build out sales teams. And I'm gonna share a kind of like a brain dump of all the things that I see founders getting wrong. So the things that founders just don't know that they don't know, typically about how to make this transition. So the ethos of Founder Culture, and I'm one of the advisors at Founder Culture, is to help scaling founders, so early to mid-stage scaling founders, not step on the same landmines as we stepped on as the scale-up founders. So we have a community where we just try to share our learnings in ways that help you build more successful companies. And it's like standing on the shoulders of giants each time. So it's a very much of a pay it forward type ethos. And the thing that we're going to specifically talk about today, I just did this brain dump. People talk about the land and expand model, but what I prefer to refer to is the demand, land, succeed, and expand model. And I'm going to do a high level overview of this funnel. And then on the right side, I've got a bunch of landmines that I'm going to go into in more detail. So if you want to stay for the whole thing, we'll go into a bunch of detail there. The first thing that I would say is I wrote this post on the Founder Culture knowledge base about from stage 0 to 1 product market fit, foundational go-to-market motions. I recommend that you consume and understand this first. This is all about that early stage of founder selling. The thing that I see founders missing and doing wrong is they are selling too early. So this post is all about going from stage 0 to stage 1 of product market fit, how to get your first set of really passionate, successful customers, a lot of founder whiteboard selling, but a lot of product market fit questioning, understandings, deep product interviews. This is all about how to really like build the first part of the monetization engine, likely before you've really built very much product. And this is something that typically only the founder can do, and the founder must get good at doing. And what I find is that technical founders often do this wrong. So start here, understand this document. This is the like baseline document to then move over into this whiteboard. So this whiteboard is about when you're starting to build this engine and you're starting to build out the team. And I guess the first thing that I would say about this is what's on this whiteboard, you're going to be optimizing this for the next decade. Like each one of the little things that's on here is going to be someone's entire job at your company. You're going to bring in experts, and your job as a founder is to know a little bit about all of it, like, a lake versus a well. You have to be good enough at all of this to be able to set the stage for the domain experts to then come in and deepen it. And you have to understand it well enough to know when they are doing a good job and when they're not. So let's get going. Let's start at the top of the funnel here. So demand is the first piece of this funnel. And this funnel goes from the very first touch point, so the very first lead that you get in your company, all the way down through the sales piece. So this is landing your deals all the way through customer success. So making sure your customers are successful, and then down through expanding your customers. And really, this is more of a flywheel than a funnel, because those expanded customers are going back through this process in many ways as you expand them. The first kind of big thing that I would say is the reason I call this the demand, land, succeed, and expand funnel is because all of these functions have to work really well together, and there won't be separate departments at the beginning. So everyone's going to be wearing multiple hats. And one thing I find founders typically get confused about is the difference between marketing land and sales land. And then this is customer success down here, probably a function that you won't build out until Series B, possibly earlier. If you do, good on you, because many companies don't, and it really hurts them when they don't. We'll talk about that. And then this expand piece can be a mixture of customer success and sales. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that later. So on the demand piece, on this marketing land piece, the first thing, well, actually both, for demand and sales, the first thing that I recommend that you do as a founder is you find some really great tool to put this activity in. You need to move beyond a Google spreadsheet. So get a CRM. I recommend not using Salesforce at the beginning. There's a point where it's inevitable that you're going to need to use Salesforce, but I recommend starting with either HubSpot or Pipedrive. HubSpot has a more integrated sales and marketing platform than Pipedrive does. I find Pipedrive to be more of a joy to use on the CRM side. But it's important that you separate out your thinking around the demand and the land pieces. And I'll talk more about that in detail in a second. But let's just go through the things that have to happen as you're building this out. So the first thing is getting leads. When you're early stage, it's very likely you're not going to have a ton of inbound. If you do, that's amazing and that's great. You're probably going to have to be doing a lot of outbound activity because the world doesn't know about your company yet. So a lot of this is about just hustling. And there's a lot of things that we did at Armory where for example, we were in a number of Slack workspaces. We invited our prospects into our Slack workspace to just be jamming with them in very, very fast iteration cycles. You're also going to be really involved in this early part in defining your ideal customer profile, your champion, and your buyer. So these are the personas that you need to figure out, and you're going to think you know them, and you're going to be wrong. I can almost guarantee you that you're going to be wrong. And it's actually probably also true that you're not going to realize how wrong you are about your personas and how expensive it is to be wrong. Your entire business is about figuring out what is your ideal customer profile. So this is a company type target that has a pain and a budget that you can solve for. Those are all really important things. And so you just need to start by talking to different personas. Really identifying that champion early is super important. I talk about this in the doc back here, but that champion is the one that's going to do your work for you inside of their company to get you into the company. So be very diligent about capturing who these people are that you talk to. When you do all these customer interviews, like I talk about in this document, make sure that you're taking notes. What's the person's title? What's their tenure? How senior are they? What is their reaction? Who are the detractors that you're talking to? Can you find any patterns about who is typically a detractor in your sales process? Really try to be very, very, very intentional and thoughtful about dialing this in every single conversation that you have. Okay, so the first thing that happens is you start to get leads coming in, whether it's inbound, good on you. If you're commercializing an open source project, you can really get a lot of great inbound. Maybe it's a lot of outbound where you're just doing a lot of hustling. You're going to meetups. You're doing things like webinars, which you'll get much more sophisticated about later. But you're doing a lot of just like outbound activity, prospecting. You're using all sorts of tools. For FounderCulture, we've got this really great platform called Teamable that we use to get intros, trusted intros. It's a distributed trust graph. So I might want to meet, Mary Jane. I don't know Mary, but Jim, who is in FounderCulture, is connected to Mary. They have a trusted relationship. I can ask Jim to introduce me to Mary. We have a platform that allows for us to do that efficiently, but you're just going to have to be doing a lot of that. And as a founder, I would really recommend that you're having at least one of these conversations a day. I would shoot for 3 a day. So at least 15 conversations a week. And one of the things that I see founders do is they get really busy doing internal work. There's just you could spend your entire day doing internal things, but if you're not interacting with the world externally, then it doesn't matter what you're doing internally. You're not going to create a successful company. So you have to be super disciplined about being externally facing. The taxonomy that we use to describe that is differentiating between good news and wins. And I see people do this wrong all the time. They nod their head like, yeah. And then I'm like, which is a good news and which is a win? And they don't really have that framework in their brain. So a win is something that happens outside the four walls of your company, something that you cannot make up yourself. You can't fool yourself into thinking it. A win is an external customer call. It is a signed contract. It is something that you can't make up. It has to happen outside of your sphere of control and influence. That is a win. Good news are things that happen internally. So you called a bunch of people. That's good news, but it's not a win unless you actually had a conversation with somebody externally. So just be really disciplined about differentiating between good news and wins, and make sure that you're getting at least, I would recommend at least 3 of these external conversations per day, 3 wins per day in terms of learning and understanding. How can you get more leads, get a better definition of your champion and your buyer? How much distance is there between your champion and your buyer? If there's very little distance, you can do a much more efficient bottoms-up strategy. If the user or the champion can just whip out their credit card and buy your thing, then it's going to be a much more efficient sales process than if a user has a manager who's the champion, has a VP who's the buyer. And understanding early, based on the product that you're building, how much of a product-led growth strategy can you build versus how much of a more traditional approach do you need to take? That's a really important thing. And there's a whole other conversation to have about product-led growth versus the more traditional, like MQL to SQL, ABM type approach. That's out of the scope of this video, but we have written about it in the FounderCulture knowledge base, so you can see it there. So you're getting some number of leads in. One of the things that I always recommend that founders do, and I never see them do as well as they need to, is to build a waterfall out from the very beginning. So this is one of those landmines. Like, this side is all about the landmines that I see founders stepping on. If you're not building out a waterfall from the very beginning of your go-to-market motion, then you are not going to understand where the problems are in your funnel. And by waterfall, what I mean is, literally, you can, in Google Sheets, you can have each of these stages as rows, and then as columns, you have dates, whether it's by week or by month or by quarter. As you get bigger, it can be longer time periods. I would recommend that you start by week or month at the beginning. And you just have the number of activities that are happening in each of these stages. So how many leads did you get this week? And how is that trending as compared to last week? And if it's down, why is it down? What's making it go down? Spend the time to do a retro with your team to look at where the conversions aren't happening in the ways that either they were or you wish that they would be happening. And as you get down in your process, making small improvements lower funnel has huge multiplication effects. So it becomes incredibly valuable to really have this waterfall and really be checking mid-funnel to see what you can be doing to be more successful. But let's go back up to the top. So you've got a certain number of leads in, you've started the waterfall. And by the way, like, founders think the waterfall has to be a super sophisticated thing. It's like, oh, I don't have enough data to build a waterfall yet. Completely false. Your waterfall might just be, how many leads did you get? You should know that number. How many external people have become known to your organization in the past week? And then how many deals did you close? That could be your first waterfall, literally 2 things. It's gonna get much more sophisticated, but you can start with just those 2 things, for example. So, don't wait for it to be perfect. Like, I always say, build the right thing fast instead of the wrong thing right. So always, like, from the very beginning of your go-to-market motion, make sure that you have this waterfall, and then you can start holding yourself accountable and later your execs accountable about what those numbers look like. So the waterfall is an incredibly powerful tool for you to be working with your exec staff and managers and the company at large, because you can't lie about these numbers. Like, this is the impact that you're making. It's in this funnel. This defines the level of success that you're going to have in this funnel. Okay, so you've got leads coming in. Traditionally, the next thing that happens is that somebody qualifies those leads. So this is called a marketing qualified lead, or an MQL. There are more versus less sophisticated ways to do this. What I recommend is that you just have, based on how much you know about your ICP, your champion, and your buyer, which is probably going to be wrong, but you just do some light qualification at the beginning. At the beginning, you're probably going to be talking to more people versus less, so you can learn more and learn faster. So in terms of how you qualify, it might be, what's the size of the company? What's the position of the person who submitted the lead? What is the geo? What do you know about how much budget they have? Probably not a lot, but maybe you do. What's their technology stack, right? You can qualify, and literally you're scoring leads. You're assigning a certain number of points. So if the company is like under 50 people, maybe that's 1 point. If it's 50 to 500 people, maybe that's 5 points. If it's 500 to 1,000 or 2,000, maybe that's 100 points or whatever. And you're doing it based on what you know about your ICP, champion, and buyer here. So the goal is for you to be able to quickly separate the wheat from the chaff. As you start to build out this demand side, this lead engine, you're not going to want to be spending the same amount of time with every lead. So you have to get good early at understanding which the more qualified leads are. A lot of the early activity here will be around things like content creation. So I put, developer evangelist here, or ideally there's a version of a dev evangelist that's also doing a lot of writing and content creation, or you're hiring, or you're doing that on a contract basis. So the goal is for you to qualify the leads that are coming in and have some sort of a scoring mechanism that you can deepen over time. Again, this is all like that, Bob Ross guy who first creates the charcoal sketch of what he's going to do, and then he deepens it with a lot of color, right? You would just want to do the charcoal sketch of all this stuff so that it's not nothing. You've got something. Even if you're just scoring it based on one metric, you're doing some kind of qualifying of your MQLs. All right, so this is all marketing land. Over time, one of the first hires that I recommend that you make is a demand gen leader. So a demand gen leader's job is to build demand, and you probably want to hire like a senior manager, maybe a director level, somebody who is fairly autonomous, does not, already knows what they're doing. It's not their first rodeo. We've got some really great referrals for demand gen leaders within FounderCulture, including there's a great demand gen leader named Anton, who is a subject matter expert in FounderCulture. So if you're in FounderCulture, you should be talking to Anton and asking him questions about how to start doing this really well and getting this flywheel spinning up here, so that you can be getting lots of qualified leads into the next stage of the funnel, which is the land piece, sales land. I always see founders making a mistake. They build out a CRM and they create stages in their CRM, and they include marketing land in their CRM. And I do not recommend that you do this because it gets very noisy. I recommend that you really keep your CRM clean. The only thing that should be entering in your CRM are qualified leads that you can turn into opportunities, which we'll talk more about in a second. Have a separate system, and I haven't used HubSpot a lot. I love Pipedrive more, but from what I understand, HubSpot is good about really tying marketing and sales land together and letting you have them all live in one broader system. There are also separate systems for marketing land versus sales land, but what you don't want to end up with is a lot of noise in your CRM. Because this is what gets really important later. You need to start having sales predictability. You need to be able to understand if you're going to hit your quarter and not be at the end of the quarter, white knuckled, hoping that you get it done. So having a very disciplined sales process and also mirroring that as a founder early, like the culture of the company is going to be based on you. And if you are not disciplined about this at the beginning, the company won't be disciplined about it either. So I often hear founders say, yeah, I'm just going to hire somebody for that. And yeah, you will hire somebody for that, but they're going to be taking their cues from you. And if you signal that it's important for you to have a good understanding of this funnel and have a waterfall early, and they walk into an environment where they're like, oh my God, this founder's really got it together. Like, they really care about this stuff. I'm going to have to bring my A game. I'm not going to be able to coast here. That's really, really critical and important. Okay, so we're in sales land. The next stage is a sales accepted lead. Now, here's why this stage matters. It often gets skipped, but I think it's a really important one. When you start to hire account executives, they are going to be given leads from marketing. And this always happens. There's always tension between sales and marketing. When you don't hit your quarter, which will probably happen, good on you if it doesn't, but sales is going to point to marketing, be like, marketing is sending us shit leads. Like how are we going to sell anything when we have to work through all this morass? Like, there's no quality here. And marketing is going to be like, we gave them 1,000 leads. Like, they just couldn't close anything. And you want to nip that in the bud early. You do not want these two departments to be pointing at each other. And so what I recommend that you do is you have this SAL stage where sales is saying, I am accepting this lead. I see it, I'm looking at it, I am taking responsibility for it. I believe that this is a lead that I can close. Or maybe they say that they're not going to accept it. And if not, why not? And how do you make sure that there is consistency and process around the reasons why, so that marketing can improve their qualification engine? So I think this is actually a really important handoff and stage. And it's going to be like a little bit weird because you don't yet have salespeople, but you're going to be hiring them. So you just have to mentally put these two hats on as a founder and say, like, are these qualified enough for sales to really be accepting? Okay, so once you get into the SAL, you get into the actual like sales opportunity funnel. And there's a couple of really important things here. The first thing is to qualify these leads from a sales perspective, which is different than qualifying them from a marketing perspective. And also, you're going to be building out opportunity stages here. A lot of really, really, really important things. I'm just going to give you a highlight of these. Like, we could spend hours just talking about this. But the thing that I recommend for B2B enterprise selling is that you use MEDDIC, but I actually prefer MEDDPIC. So MEDDIC is a sales methodology. Metrics, economic buyer, decision criteria, decision process, paper process, identify the pain, and champion. And what you can literally do is you can build out your CRM where you have fields for each of these things. And you understand, like, have I identified all of these things? Do I have answers for all of these things? You can start to report on which opportunities don't have all of these. And then you can start to build out your stages so that they reflect the process of doing all of this work. So you might have a discovery stage and a qualification stage and a proof of concept stage. And it's really important to have stage entry and exit criteria for each of these opportunity stages. And I recommend that you start simply and you just like improve it over time, just like that first brush stroke. But how does something get from, the first stage to the second stage? So that first discovery call, what has to happen on that call in order for you to be able to move it to a lower stage? You need to be, again, disciplined about ensuring, like, I am not going to move a deal to the next stage until they've satisfied the exit criteria for the current stage. Maybe that's that you've identified a champion. Maybe it's that you make sure that you understand what their decision process is. What's it going to take for them to actually buy this thing? Or their paper process. Procurement, like, is where deals often go to not necessarily die, but like languish, right? And so, like, what does that look like? Do you need to do a security questionnaire? You don't want to be surprised by this stuff later. So really going deep on these different criteria and figuring out how to map them to the entry and exit criteria as you build out your stages is an important thing. While we're talking about opportunity stages, let me just talk about POCs for a second. So if you're doing proof of concepts, I often get questions like, should we charge or should they be free? The answer is you want to do whatever is going to be most effective for optimizing your funnel. And what it probably means is that you're going to want to scope it based on how heavy the POC is. One of the things that we did at Armory is we created this concept of a burrito menu. So the burrito menu is the mistake that oftentimes companies make and also the buyers make is they treat the POC as if it's like a full production ready POC. And if you don't define the success criteria that you can do the POC against, and you try to minimize those, then you're gonna end up languishing in the POC stage for a lot longer than you should. So the burrito menu is basically like, it's kind of like Chipotle, like you're making your burrito and there's different options, right? You got three kinds of meat, a bunch of different kinds of veggies, and it's like, hey, these are the POC options that we can offer you. But it's got to come from this menu. Like, we're not going to do anything off menu. Oh, you want something off menu? That's going to have to be a paid pilot. So our POC is free, but we really scope it down to specific success criteria that we're then going to measure against. And if we hit those success criteria, we're going to agree that this was a successful POC. And so you basically use this burrito menu to scope it and make sure that you don't end up in POC land forever. So that's this one here. Okay, so you've got your opportunity stages dialed in, you're being disciplined about it, you're, going over your CRM on a regular basis, like, at least once a week. It's either you or maybe you've hired your first, 2 AEs. I do recommend hiring more than one at a time. We can talk more about that in a separate video, but let's imagine that you've, maybe you're at the point now where you've hired a demand gen leader, you've got some people that are, evangelizing, creating demand, whether they're creating content or you're doing a bunch of, webinars or other types of go-to-market activities. Maybe you've hired your first SDR, sales development rep. Sometimes these live in marketing and sometimes these live in sales. But the SDRs, their goal is really to qualify up here at the top, qualify these deals so that when an AE gets into it, they are spending their time with fully as qualified as possible of prospects. So you're going through this whole thing, you're really building this out. You're probably still playing sales engineer, or one of your co-founders or execs is. Maybe you've hired your first SE. Probably it depends on your sales motion, whether you have like inside or digital like sales motions, or if you have more of a field sales motion. That's a whole conversation there to have. I really recommend starting with AEs that are scrappy. And these are just like creative, like I would interview for creativity. So you don't want to hire, super junior, but probably earlier in their career, but just super scrappy, super creative, willing to really roll their sleeves up, because you don't exactly know what it's going to take to move from founder selling to non-founder selling. It's a really, really, really important thing for you to figure that out. The ability for you to raise your next round is going to be largely dependent on how much you've figured out how to remove yourself as the founder from the sales process. Once you've shown that you've created a little bit of repeatability in your sales process and you have others that can do it, then a VC looks at your waterfall, and they say, oh, we can pour more money into this thing and we're going to be able to get more scalability out of it. As the founder, you turn into the choke point. So you're really working to figure out as quickly as possible how to remove yourself from this process. Maybe you stay in as the sales engineer for a little bit longer, or more likely you probably provide exec air cover for a certain type of deal. So maybe it's your larger logos that you want to close. You get pulled in by these new AEs, but you have to find the right kinds of AEs that are just super creative and scrappy. The wrong kind of AE will likely be this field seller who has worked at larger companies and expects all the marketing collateral to be in place. They expect, big expense budgets and the ability to spend a lot of money to make you money. It's too early for you to hire people like this. So interview for creativity, scrappiness, how willing they are to work with a marketing team that has not yet built out a lot of the content. Are they willing to deal with that, or are they not? Those are some of the things that you can interview for as you're looking for these first AEs. Okay, so congratulations, you get a deal, go to closed won, or maybe deals are going to close lost. One of the things that I find, a couple things about this stage. So a lot of times, people treat closed lost as like, well, that didn't work out, let's just move on. But there's a lot to learn from closed lost deals. I always say that failure is actually just value accruing to an unexpected party. So you thought that you were going to get revenue with a closed won deal. You thought that was going to be the outcome. But what you ended up getting was the opportunity to learn a lot of things about why you didn't get that revenue. So you weren't expecting to accrue that value of that opportunity to learn. But guess what? It's in your lap. It's here. Learn from it. The only failure is a failure to learn. So really understand, why did that go closed lost? If you've done this right, you should have a very strong champion who's super bummed that the deal didn't close, because that champion was really advocating for you inside their company. Take that champion out to lunch, or do a retro with them. Most founders don't do retros with customers or prospects, but it's a really, really valuable thing to create a culture of retrospection. If you are a learning organization, then you should be retroing. And my favorite retro is the 3 L's retro. What did you like, learn, and long for? So take your prospect out to lunch and do a retro with them, or to find some way to have like an more intimate conversation than just a Zoom call. I don't know, with COVID, I know this is harder, but maybe you do like an outdoor patio lunch or something. But it is absolutely worth you spending time to dig in, to understand from your champion, why did that not go through? And importantly, what would it take for it to go through? So oftentimes, especially early stage, closed loss is a really great way to inform the product roadmap. We thought that this feature was, a nice to have, but it was actually a blocker. If you could build this, I'd be happy to try again. You'll probably hear a prospect or your champion saying things like that. So really, really, really learn from the closed loss deals. All right, so everybody always says land and expand, but Matt Feil at DataStax, the founding CEO of DataStax, who was an advisor to Armory in the early days, he just really helped us understand this with a lot of clarity. So thank you, Matt, if you ever see this. There's a succeed piece that has to happen in between land and expand. Without the succeed piece, you will not be expanding. And what typically happens is that companies do not invest in customer success early enough, and so they don't have enough visibility into what it takes to actually make this succeed piece successful. And so what I recommend that you do is just be very cognizant and aware that you probably don't have as much visibility or understanding of what's happening here as you think you do. Because you're so busy just getting new deals to closed won, you're probably not paying a lot of attention here. One of the most important things that you can do, and that I recommend that you put resources against, whether it's focus or engineering resources, is the onboarding process. Just like with your employees, the onboarding process will dictate the level of success that your customers have with your product. And it's very likely that your onboarding process is pretty terrible. And it's probably a lot worse than you even realize that it is, because this is your idea. It's your company. You know in your head exactly how to use this thing, but your customer doesn't. And a lot of times, especially if you've got a champion that is in a buyer that's different than the actual user, the user might have just been handed something new, and probably nobody's talked to the user. The user might be the developers at your at the customer's company. And so how do you actually start talking to those users, the ones that are actually going to have to onboard, and doing a lot of the same kinds of customer interviews that you did to sell, to really start to understand what are the use cases that actually are going to be successful? What is the implementation that you need to be doing in order to create a great experience? And how do you really improve onboarding? How do you make support more self-service? How can you start to create a knowledge base or ways for people to answer their own questions? And then, like, asterisk on that, by the way, if you can turn tickets into KB articles, you are so far ahead of the game. You get such a flywheel of SEO by creating public content. And I don't ever see anybody doing this well. It just blows my mind. You've got these tickets in this private closed system with problems that you are solving for customers with your platform. And just take the extra little bit of time to turn those into more obfuscated, not confidential, knowledge base articles. So what I recommend that you do, you're probably using Jira for your ticketing system, or maybe you've moved to something larger like Salesforce Support Cloud. But let's just say that you're using Jira. So create a stage when you're closing a ticket where the engineer or the person who's closing the ticket has to describe it in a less sensitive way, so without confidential information. That's a required field to close the ticket. Then you have your stub for the KB article. Have another view where you have all of those, and then have some sort of a motion, maybe it's once a week or once a month, where you're taking those out of the holding area and publishing them as KBs. And it's probably many people in the company that are responsible for doing that. It's not just the engineering team. It's not just customer success if they exist yet, but it is you as a founder saying, it is important for me to create a culture at this company where knowledge gets scaled, where we get 2 for 1. We already closed the ticket. We did all the hard work. Let's do another, 5 or 10% of work to get a ton more value. We're going to get more leads because we have more content out in the world, because we've made public knowledge base articles. So when people Google for very specific technical terms, our knowledge base articles are going to show up based on these tickets. So this is like one of the best things that you can do to create really high quality original content. And most people just completely don't do it. They just punt on it. It's just mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing to me. It's like an extra 5%, 10% work is going to completely change your top of funnel, inbound, organic search results. How is that not a good ROI? So you can tell I'm pretty passionate about this. It just really blows my mind. I'd say 85, 90% of founders I talk to have not done anything here to make their private content public in ways that help them optimize this as a flywheel. Okay, so as you scale here, you will likely be hiring people like technical account managers. These are the people that are building strong relationships with your customers. It's important that you can make them successful. We'll talk more about that in a second. You might be hiring solutions architects. You're probably going to be hiring out somebody to be doing global support and building out a global support org. Make one of their OKRs their ability to do this, to make it more self-service and to make that content public. You're probably also hiring tech writers. Make it their job to be making things more self-service so that their OKR is based on the number of tickets that are coming in. Can they lower that? One of the things that I often see happen is there is a lot of siloing that happens within these functions as the company scales. At the beginning, when it's just you're hiring your first, director level people, your player coaches, and then eventually you're hiring your execs here. At the beginning, you can't imagine this being siloed, but it gets so siloed. Like, marketing is focused up here, and sales is saying that marketing is not giving them what they need. Marketing is saying that sales doesn't know how to sell things. And then importantly, customer success is getting stuck with the bag. So sales is, being creative to sell deals, and you haven't really defined your ICP in a tight enough way with enough discipline. So now they're selling deals that are not standard with your product roadmap and your use case. And so customer success, and specifically the TAMs, are the ones that are having to basically be apologizing all the time to these customers that are like, I bought this thing, I was promised this thing by the salespeople that it would work, and it doesn't. So really dialing in and understanding those use cases, making sure that you are comping salespeople in a way that they are selling that is consistent with what the product can actually do, and that you are penalizing sellers that are selling things that are outside the scope. If you're not disciplined about that, you're going to have a world of pain here in the customer success organization. But this is the piece that must happen to get to the expand. And you'll notice that this is really like an hourglass, right? It expands out here because you want your net revenue retention to be at least 120%. This is one of the sexiest metrics for VCs. And what it effectively means is, when I sell something and I go through all the pain and the cost of selling something, am I able to expand that customer so that I'm getting more than 100% of the original land revenue? And when the answer is yes, VCs are like, oh, something's working here. People aren't just buying this thing. It's spreading in their organizations. It's expanding, and that is a much lower cost than the initial sale. Best in class NRR is like 175%. If you can even get to 130, 135, 140%, you're just going to be golden. So this is why this matters so much, investing in this earlier than you think you need to, because without this layer here, you will not get this. You will not get these expands. What you'll end up with instead is churn, which is like the death metric, right? When you have churn, it means that you haven't figured this thing out yet. You are somehow selling things, but those customers are not getting value from your product. You cannot build a company with high levels of churn. So in terms of how you do the expand piece, some companies will have dedicated account managers. Some companies will have it be a combination of customer success and sales, where there's a handoff. Customer success, you're starting to instrument this. We'll talk about instrumentation more in a minute, but customer success can see, oh, we sold 100 or 1,000 seats, or whatever your licensing metric is, and we're using 78% of those. And so they start to, and the renewal is coming up. But by coming up, it's not next week or next month. It's coming up in a quarter, or it's coming up in 6 months or 9 months. And so you start to bring sales back in, a quarter or more before the renewal is actually supposed to happen, to really try to understand how can we get that license utilization to be above 100%. Because it's a really easy expand conversation when the account manager can walk in and be like, hey, we sold you this thing and you're using twice what your license allows for. Like, let's get you trued up. So speaking of true ups, one of the things that you can do as you get more sophisticated is you can do an MSA that automatically has true ups built in. So there's a lot more to talk about here. Getting multi-year deals can be a beautiful thing. So highly recommend figuring out how to do that. Again, a whole other separate conversation there. ELAs, enterprise license agreements. So effectively, let's say that you start by selling to a number of different divisions inside a company, and then procurement sticks their head up and they're like, oh my God, this vendor is all over our company. We need to package this up as an ELA so that we don't just completely lose our ability to control our spend. And by the way, ELAs are not necessarily an easy yes from your perspective. You may want to wait to do an ELA to get more leverage. So you may find yourself in a position where procurement is saying, hey, we need to do an ELA, and you're pushing back because you know that if you can knock down 10 more departments inside a large, Global 2000 company, that you're gonna have a lot more leverage when you do the ELA. So there's a lot to talk about there as well. Okay, so I've talked about the demand, land, succeed, expand funnel at a high level. Let's go into more detail on what some of these landmines are that founders often step into. The first one that I really want to focus in on is the instrumentation. Oh, you know what? There's actually one thing that I want to do before I talk here. We talked about earlier the siloing that happens as the company expands. I actually pulled up a picture. So this is our old office at Armory, and this is what I put on the door. I literally took one of the conference rooms and I called it the GTM War Room. What is the number one thing blocking us from growing faster? Let's fix that thing. Come on in and tell DROdio. And I literally camped out in this conference room, and I would have just all these different leaders come in, and we would talk about whatever that number one thing was that was blocking growth from their perspective. So, and this is something you can start to do pretty early. Like as soon as you start to hire people for these functions, like you hire a demand gen leader, or you hire your first AEs, and just generally as a founder, I always recommend that you ask yourself, what is the number one thing stopping us from growing faster? I think it's actually a really hard question to answer, and people will have multiple answers. So even just getting to one answer as an organization and talking about that at all hands meetings, like what's the number one thing that's keeping us from growing faster? Do we all agree? And how do we fold that into then our OKR process so that we can solve for that? And how do we make sure that that filters down to people's day-to-day activity? They're chipping away at whatever that number one thing is. It's a really good exercise, but it's especially important as you're starting to build out your GTM process. Okay, so landmines, instrumentation. It is hard to do this, especially when you're early stage, because things are changing so quickly. And so what the number one thing that you must do is start with a waterfall, make it really simple, but start to track progress over time. Start to understand how all of these different metrics are looking every week, every month, every quarter, and which ones are improving, which ones aren't, why. You can start to figure out how to apply budget against those things and focus against those things and prioritize your OKRs based on those things. You must have a really good waterfall. Very, very, very important. Also recommend that you start to think about revenue ops more broadly and ways to pull instrumentation out of these systems. We used Mode. I actually prefer Looker. So we moved at Armory from Mode to Looker. Looker is more just accessible. It's more like WYSIWYG, drag and drop. As you scale the company, everyone's not going to be as technical. And just creating these dashboards that the exec staff has that you can use with your exec staff to have conversations that are based on data and not feelings and opinions, really valuable. But also for the company writ large, having a company dashboard about the metrics that are most important. What's your North Star metric? You should have one North Star metric, ideally, maybe it's a few, that you're optimizing for. That will be the one metric that defines the success of your business. That is the one metric that if you can keep chipping away at that, that is going to enable you to be growing faster. How do you put that metric front and center? How do you talk about it at all hands? Like a lot of the job of a CEO and founders generally is just repeating things over and over and over again, and importantly, storytelling around those things to provide context and meaning behind these numbers. So it's important that you have the numbers so you can have the conversation based on those numbers. So getting a BI dash going that has that waterfall, but also what I recommend is you just go to your execs and you say, or you agree with them, what are the top metric or metrics that they're using to run their department? Maybe it's sprint velocity, maybe it's story points, things like that for engineering. Maybe it's AE top of funnel activity for sales. So you have a report card for the AEs. And speaking of the AEs, it's very important that you're setting expectations and you're defining comp around what the desired behavior is of the AEs. AEs tend to be very driven by comp. It's why they're AEs. Sales is hard. Like if anyone gets pissed about how much money a seller is making, it's a really easy answer. Go be a seller. Like if you want to make that kind of money, then go put your ego on the line every day on every phone call and deal with the rejection of being a salesperson. It's like I never understand companies that have a hard time with the amount of money that sellers make. Because if you've comped them right, when they're making a lot of money, the company's making a lot of money. So I would tell our sellers, especially our early sellers, like, my goal is for you to make $1 million this year. And I don't cap the amount of money that they can make. I don't want there to be a cap. I want them to have unlimited upside. What is really important is that you are comping in a way that is healthy for the company. Things like, what is their base to variable split? What did the accelerators look like? How much are they getting comped for expands? And how do you work the expand piece into the land piece, right? Do you want your sellers to be only hunters? They're out bringing in new revenue? Or do you want them to also be maintaining a relationship and expanding existing deals? Well, we can't manufacture time. It's all about focus. So there's no right answer. It's just the answer for your company. But the less they're hunters, the more they're working in this expand world, the less time they're going to have to be bringing more in and through the funnel. Also, set expectations on what percentage of your leads here, the sales qualified leads, are going to be driven by marketing. So are sellers expected to generate 50% of their SQLs, or can they just sit back and wait for marketing to bring it to them? If they're expected to be generating it, what is the activity they need to be doing? So you should know by now, how many calls do you need to have in order to be able to get to an SQL? This is why that waterfall is so important. What are the qualification criteria? And then you start to set those top of funnel metrics on an AE scorecard and report card, and you share it with all the AEs so they can all see who is doing the most top of funnel activity and how is that going for them. The nice thing about sales is, like, it's very transparent. Either you are bringing deals in or you're not. It's a very easy metric to understand whether a salesperson is being successful. And so leverage that. Sellers are very used to seeing report cards that show all the sellers' activities. And it's very motivating for them. Like, oh, this other AE, they get up at 7 a.m. every morning and they do 2 hours of prospecting. And, and they're also killing it. Like, I need to be doing that too. So comp is a very important thing. That's a whole conversation as well. By the way, put into the comments the things that you would like us to go deeper on. We can definitely do more of these. So, I mean, like I said, each one of these things is something you're going to be optimizing for the next decade. Okay, so we talked about instrumentation, talked about DROdio POCs. These two down here aren't landmines as much as they are just like pro tips. So one of the things that we did early at Armory that worked well is we had technology partners. And a technology partner is basically a really, really, really strong champion. And then you being willing to give a discount to the company because you all agree that you haven't built the things on your product roadmap that they're going to want, but you believe that they are a very, very good customer to help you build out your product roadmap. So technology partners can be great early customers. And the way that I recommend papering them up is you basically paper them up at the higher price. So, what you hope to be selling at a year, and then just give them a discount for the first year, or maybe it's for the first, 2 or whatever. But you're basically you're agreeing, hey, there's this point in the future where we agree what success looks like with a certain set of features. We're rewinding to today and agreeing that we don't have all those things, but we're going to work with you to build those things. And you are agreeing to be very accessible to us. You're going to get on phone calls once a week or once a month or whatever your product team wants. And when we get to that point, we are agreeing that there's going to be this much value, and try to anchor off that higher value and then give a discount today so that you can remove that discount over time. Another really good tip, this came from one of our AEs at Armory, I love this, is this Chinese menu testimonials concept. So it's very likely that especially larger companies are not going to want to speak publicly about them being your customer. And, that just happens. These large global 2000s, they don't know if you're even going to be around in a year. They don't want to tie their name to yours. What you can do is you can offer this Chinese menu. So just like when you go to a Chinese restaurant, there's, a lot of things on the menu and you can kind of pick and choose what you want, like an a la carte type menu. You can do something similar where you say, hey, if you do X, we are willing to give you Y% discount on your contract. This is especially valuable if you're commercializing an open source project, because one of the line items in that Chinese menu can be that you talk about the fact that you're using the open source project, even if you don't talk about our company. And maybe that's worth a 5% discount annually. And so, whatever just give them like a dozen options. And when you're signing the contract, you basically make this one of the addenda where it's like, hey, which of these are you comfortable doing? And it is so valuable for you at the beginning to get them to check a few of those boxes. It's more valuable than the revenue. For you to be able to talk about these success stories publicly is really, 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 really good. So give them a bunch of options. Some are safer, some are more risky with different percentage discounts. That is just a really, really nice, elegant way to have a lot more fidelity in the level of championing that they're willing to do for you publicly. Okay, I think we covered everything. So again, I'm DROdio, and I did this for the FounderCulture founder community, but we're also making it public because what we really want to do at FounderCulture is pay the knowledge forward that's in the brains of the scaling founders into the heads of the earlier stage founders so they don't step on the same landmines that we stepped on. And what we'd love to do is we'd love to also help a bunch of people become founders. It's a scary thing to become a founder, but the more you know, the less scary it becomes. So although our community is a closed private community for founders, which is important because founders need that safe space where they can really speak openly and honestly with each other, we try to make as much of our content public as we can without attribution. So that's under Chatham House rule, so that if you're a founder in our community, you can speak openly and honestly and safely, but the learnings that you're sharing, we can scale out to the world, like I'm scaling this out here. So I hope it was valuable. Would love to hear what you want to hear more of, less of. Was this too long? I see it's 50 minutes. I thought it was going to be 15. So yeah, just let me know how we can create content and get content out of our heads that's going to be really valuable for you to build amazing companies. We would love to improve the odds. We want to make it so that more than 1 out of every 200 of the best companies creates a billion-dollar company. We think it should be way more than that. So that's why FounderCulture exists. All right, ciao.